Good afternoon, Father. Good afternoon, everyone present here. I hope
Good
I'm clearly
afternoon.
audible.
Yes.
A very pleasant afternoon to this August gathering. I, Kanvika Sharma, on behalf of the eco-friendly club St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, welcome you to Let's Talk Environment, a session on conscious living. I cordially welcome Reverend Father Dr. A. Rex Angelo, S.J., Principal, St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, all our respected faculty members, and our dear participants. I extend a warm welcome to our speaker for the day, Ms. Mallika Arya. Ms. Arya is a change maker, environmental campaigner with a passion for gardening and all things green. She completed her bachelor's in psychology from Lady Shri Ram College, where she spent most of her time outside the classroom pursuing athletics and football, going on to create LSR's first football team. Right after college, she joined the Teach for India Fellowship, during which she was placed in an NGO school in Gurugram and taught a bunch of third and fourth graders for 2 years. After the fellowship, she took a gap year to travel, explore, and broaden her understanding of the environmental crisis that is unfolding all around. She further continued her studies at the University of Sydney and completed her Masters of Sustainability, having had the opportunity to work with a range of different organizations. She went from working in Varanasi on a Ganga cleanup project to now being a senior campaigner at Purpose, a social impact agency on environmental and social movements across the country. Outside of work, Ms. Mallika works with her father to run Museo Camera, a museum and center for photography, art, and culture. Mallika is a minimalist and zero waste advocate. She has been recognized as a young and emerging environmentalist by the Global Peace Initiative for Women. We welcome you, Mallika. It is an honor to have you with us today. I request our principal, Reverend Father Rex, to formally welcome Mallika.
So good afternoon to all of you. Dr. Purvi Vedatwal, the head of the Department of Economics, and our chief guest of the day, Ms. Mallika Arya, and our esteemed members of the Zavarian family and students. What a nice thing to do on the World Environment Day, WED. It stands for WED. It is like a wedding. World Environment Day, WED, is a wedding day because we are reminded once again that we are wedded to nature. I am fascinated by the title you have given for today's program. Let us talk environment. I thought we have been talking and talking and talking without doing much. So today's session, especially after listening to the minimalist and the zero waste advocate, Ms. Mallika, we should be able to put into practice what we have been talking so far. This morning in our NEPTA campus, we planted about 100 trees because we know that each tree can produce about 260 pounds of oxygen each year. 1 acre of trees removes up to 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide each year. Trees also lower the temperature because of the water evaporation. So trees help us in many ways. We think trees means only flowers, fruits, and the roots, etc., medicine, etc. But very hidden way, in a very hidden way, they contribute to the health, peace, and the joy of the humanity. Unfortunately, we have been cutting trees, we have invaded trees, but one good aspect of the lockdown of the pandemic is that nature is recovering itself. We see animals, wild animals, right in front of our college gate these days. I have seen some wild animals because they are reclaiming uh, their positions now, which we have occupied by our domination. They say human beings breathe about 9.5 tons of air every year. But we know oxygen alone makes only 23% of the atmosphere. And the oxygen, the air which we consume, the oxygen which we consume, only one third of oxygen we take it in. So that works out to a total of about 740 kgs of oxygen per year. 8 or 9 trees can contribute this for a person. If a person wants to live a very happy, very healthy life, 16 trees are needed. Now the question is, how many trees have you planted? We know people have cut the trees, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But how many trees have we planted is a question. That is why we began today with a sapling of 100 in our own campus, planting of 100 saplings in our own campus. When we listen to such experienced people like Ms. Mallika, we should get motivated. Now, this zero waste advocate has become a very important and relevant concept now. Formerly, they were talking about refuse, reuse, and recycle. Now, this zero waste, we know we waste our time. It goes without saying. We waste our money, we waste our efforts, but we also waste a lot of natural resources. Unless and until we use it in an optimal way, we will be criminals to the nature. So, to bring some more insights into our commitment towards nature, we have with us in our midst Ms. Mallika Arya. I welcome you wholeheartedly. I am sure that our interaction with you will open our eyes to see what we can do as a teacher, as a student, and as a manager. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I definitely look at this as an opportunity to learn as well from all of you.
Thank you, Father. Thank you for your kind words. Moving ahead, World Environment Day is the United Nations Day for encouraging worldwide awareness and action to protect our environment. It offers a global platform for inspiring positive change. It pushes for individuals to think about the way they consume, for businesses to develop greener models, for farmers and manufacturers to produce more sustainably, for governments to invest in repairing the environment, for educators to inspire students to take action, and for the youth to build a greener future. Being the most conscious beings of this planet, it becomes our moral and ethical responsibility to undo and cure the damage that we have been causing to our planet. Not only to protect the planet, but also to make it a safer place to survive for us and our future generations. The past 1 year of the pandemic practically reversed all the positive steps which were taken in the direction of environmental sustainability. The increased usage of single use plastics like disposable masks, PPE kits, and hand sanitizer bottles, etc., in order to take precautions and create hygienic conditions to control the virus spread, led to a widespread increase in waste generation. As we enter the second wave of the pandemic, it becomes important to develop an all round perspective towards combating it. We need to keep ourselves safe, but also we need to make sure that our precautionary practices do not harm our planet. It is high time we adopt conscious practices and promote environmental sustainability. The motivated youth of our country finds it indeed important to raise their voice for the issues which concern our population. Therefore, it is vital to involve them in the process of change by spreading awareness about conscious living. And what is better than to have a 28-year-old young environmentalist share her experience and inspire the youth? So, before I go ahead to invite Malika, I would request you all that if you have any questions relating to the talk and relating to environment or environmental sustainability, you can drop them in the chat box and we will take them up in the question and answer session after the talk. So, with this, I welcome Mallika once again. So, I hope you are keeping safe. It's our honor to have you amongst us today for the session. And I must admit that after reading your profile in your blog, I was all the more intrigued and excited to moderate this session and talk to you about your passion for, as you say, everything green. So every individual has dreams, but a very few of them, realize it or live those dreams at such a young age. So I would start by asking that how old were you when you realized that you had that feeling which compelled you to live a conscious life and start being more active and taking environmental practices up?
Sure. Once again, thanks for having me here. To answer your first question, the first few years, I think growing up, I was always surrounded by people who really truly cared for the environment. So whether it was, my father who loved farming and has been, has actively farm 20, 25 years, or whether it was my grandparents who, my daddy wrote books on gardening. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So my grandmother wrote books on gardening. She was, a flower show judge. She had the most fabulous garden. We were gifted things like plants and trees and saplings for birthdays. So, I think all those little things really added up. So I always had that support uh, growing up. And then I think I would say once I finished the Teach for India fellowship, once, I had engaged with my kids for 2 years in the classroom, I started thinking about what is the planet that we're actually leaving them behind, right? I got so attached to my students that I wanted to see a bright future for them, right? And just getting them to sit exams and get good marks and, prepare academically, professionally to get jobs wasn't enough. Because as we've seen, I think without the environment, we're nothing, right? So it was really after the fellowship that I started actively thinking about what is my role.
Hmm.
So yeah.
All right. So that's great to hear. Like from a very young age, you've been thinking of, impacting lives, and from the fellowship, you decided that you should bring more impact on the lives of students you've been teaching. So I've read your blogs, and I must say they are quite applaudable and really well written. Really intrigues the reader when you're reading it, and really compels you to read more and more. So, as a traveler, you've explored several countries now. So, according to your observations, which country of the ones that you visited had the most sound and conscious practices with regards to the environment?
Sure. So I think every country definitely has their pros and cons. There's no country that at least I have been to that is perfect. I think when we talk about sound and conscious practices with regard to the environment, that's really broad. It could mean anything, right? How does that one
Mhm.
particular country really look after its natural resources? I'll take one example and just want to again point out this is just one part of sustainability, or like when we talk about environment, but it gets the most attention because it is very visible, and that's waste, right? I remember when I was in London in 2017, and I was absolutely shocked to see bags and bags of plastic, of like waste that were kind of collected outside commercial areas in the evenings. And my friends and family very proudly told me that, oh, this is all recycled. And then shortly after that, in January 2018, was when China announced its green sword policy, right? And that kind of like according essentially what the green sword policy said was that we're going to ban any import of specifically plastic waste and a few other recyclable materials into China. And that kind of was a wake up call to everyone, right? When you say that when you're living in a Western country and you say my things are being recycled, I think for the longest time, and this has been happening at least for the last 25 years, that countries had been shipping their waste to another country, right? I think it made people realize that when I put my waste into a recycling bin, it doesn't magically just disappear. It's going to someone else's backyard, right? And I think that's when I started to at least understand the concept of not in my backyard. And this is a concept that has been spoken about and studied for years and years, right? And I think that global shift in how materials are processed and tossed and recycled was really like a turning point, right? So I think, in short, no country has it 100% right. Recently, 2 years ago, having lived in Australia for 2 years, I realized that, while the picture that we may have in our head is clean beaches and oceans and beautiful coastlines, there's a lot more, right? I think the fact that there is so much waste generated per person in a lot of countries, a lot of developed countries, is something that we really, really need to think about, right? It's not, it's
Definitely.
not, it's just not sustainable in the long run. So I think, apart from, of course, the what do you call it, the infrastructure or policy level change that is required in all these countries, I think there's definitely, what is needed is we need to dismantle the years and years of conditioning that have allowed us to think that, okay, this use and throw culture is okay, you know. So
Definitely.
yeah, so just to again like answer your question in short, I don't think there's any country that I've explored that has it 100% right. Everyone is kind of on their own journey and figuring it out, unfortunately, as we go.
That's true. So, as a student of sustainability, you've been studying environmental practices with a much developed and guided perspective. So, taking the case of India, do you think we as a country are doing enough to protect our diverse yet precious ecosystems, I would say?
Yeah, I think that's a great question at a time where we see rampant destruction of trees in our own national capital for, to make way for buildings. And here, I think everyone knows I'm referring to a particular project that is going on right now. Or, the very destruction of the Aravallis in Haryana or Rajasthan, or similarly other forests in, other parts of the country. I think we seriously need to think about this pro-development narrative and agenda that many of those in power come with. To what extent are we willing to development, and development at what cost? So I think while there is definitely a general general awareness that is generating and rising, especially in young people in our country, where they're calling out governments, companies for not doing enough, there's still, I believe, an overall lack of political will to act, uh,
Mm-hmm.
to protect various ecosystems. But this, of course, I strongly believe does differ from state to state and city to city. So just an example, over the last 1.5 years, through my work with Purpose, I have been leading our work in Bangalore, and that's mostly around mobility, right? And when we think about mobility, one of the biggest issues is emissions, and of course it is linked to everything else in the environment, right? So
Definitely.
close, and there we've really truly seen how government leadership can make a big difference. The Directorate of Urban Land Transport has actively taken steps to improve public transport, to improve non-motorized transport. So again, like different from city to city. And I think like, again, coming back to this general rising of awareness, we've seen how people have rallied again and again to protect something like the Aravali Biodiversity Park. And the reason I'm taking this example is because it's literally right next to my house. Um, so I think it's great that we're seeing more and more people standing up, and hopefully that will convert to some sort of political will, because where there's people pressure, there's nothing stopping that. I feel like that's a very, very strong thing that can make a difference.
Definitely, definitely. So, being the student, you took up some limiting practices for yourself in order to reduce waste generation. I was reading your blog while you were in college, I think back in Australia. So you'd written about how you limited your shopping practices, how your consumption to reduce waste generation. So, can you share some of these vital daily practices which all of us could adopt as students? Because there are many young participants here, and if they take up some practices, it might be greatly impactful.
Sure. So just so everyone knows here, this blog that is being kind of referred to was written, started in 2016, and I would say I stopped around 2019. It's just work life took over, and I haven't had time to kind of update it. But yeah, that's the blog that's being spoken about. I started it when I was actually traveling, but I did write a few from Australia when I was studying as well. I think it was pretty simple. Firstly, to start with, I never looked at it as, I never saw it as something that was where I was limiting myself. I felt very comfortable. I never felt like I didn't have enough, right? So I think it's been pretty simple for me so far. And the blog that you're referring to was that I only buy what I actually need, right? And of course, when you're a student, you also have financial constraints, so you can't like buy everything that you
I
want. But
understand.
I think for the longest time, I think for 2.5 years at a stretch, I didn't buy any new piece of clothing, and I actually realized that I didn't need to. I was very happy buying secondhand or just using what I had, right? So there are lots of, as a student, when you're actually buying less, it helps you save money. That's how I used to look at it, for sure, in the beginning. And I think it's definitely like a change in mindset that takes time, right? So it's not something that you can say, okay, from tomorrow, like nothing. I think you
There
have to
should
take
be a
one.
conscious realization.
Yeah, and it should be one step at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself that, okay, I have to do everything in one go. It's okay, like
Definitely.
take it one step at a time and do that step really well, right? I think the first one of the things that really helped me reduce like the waste that I generate, especially, is having a low. I collected whatever I would generate in a week, and then at the end of the week I would actually like sort through my trash and see, okay, you know what was necessary and what wasn't. um and then I think one of the biggest things for me as well was when you start questioning yourself, where does this product go once I'm finished using it? So, for example, when you have a banana and you throw away the peel, you know it's going to, and I mean, if you throw it away in the right space, which is a composting pit or, any sort of green space, okay, it will eventually go back into the ground, right? It will eventually add value. But I think when you start questioning yourself for the products you use, saying that, okay, what will happen to this once I finish using it? And even more, how did it get to me? Like, what was the process that was required to produce it in the first place? And this is where I actually started thinking about the impact of our consumption, not just on the planet, but also on people. So when I was talking to you about like buying secondhand clothing, I really started reading and watching more documentaries on fast fashion, and I realized that the fashion industry is extremely like exploitative.
That's
We
true.
all know, I think it was 2013 when the Rana Plaza incident happened in Bangladesh, where I'm not sure of the exact number. I think it was about 1,200 people who lost their lives working in poor conditions, making cheap clothing for people who are demanding it. So if you go into a shop like Forever 21 or H&M, you see new clothes on their racks every week, right? Do we ever think how they are getting there? Do we ever think about, you know, um, they make millions of pieces of one particular style. What happens to it when only like 30% of the clothes are bought, right? And then of course they're made using very cheap materials. When you wash them, there's kind of this, they're microplastics which go into your groundwater, etc. So there's a whole range of very complex issues, and I think for me the biggest learning was looking at it from multiple angles, not just looking at it from what is the impact on what is the impact of plastic on planet, but also looking at it from the other side, thinking what is the impact that it has on people. So
Definitely.
I think I'm not going, like, I definitely believe that there is enough content out there in the world for all of you to pick up these daily practices, whether it's whether it's making your own soap, whether it's understanding, those deodorants that come in cans are really, really harmful, not just for your body, but also for the environment. Those kind of tips are there everywhere. I'm not going to really talk about those tips. Just going to, I guess, talk to you today about how my thinking changed over the course of time as well.
That's true. We really want to get a better perspective on things when we talk about things like in environment or sustainability, because you're an expert in the field. And as you say, you have a perspective of questioning things. When you said that when you were living in Australia, you started questioning your practices, that, okay, what can I do? So that is what we need in the youth of today. They know how to raise their voices on social media, but they need to channelize their voice in the right direction to get things done in a country like this. When you say that there is a lack of political will to take action, so until and unless the youth starts asking questions which are vital and the youth starts taking steps, it won't happen. So that is why, we have an expert like you here to give us a more better perspective on things which are happening around, and how can we really channelize that energy in the right direction. So
I think I just want to say I'm definitely not an expert. I think I'm here to learn as much as all of you are, and it's a journey. I think everyone, it's not like you reach this one point and you know everything. I think every day there is so much to learn. Sometimes I feel like I just don't have enough hours in the day.
I can definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So, talking about traveling, I was, reading about your Antarctica expedition. So, you had written that you had to collect funds from various people to fund your trip or project, I must say. So, it must have been a difficult task, because when you go out to get funds for something vital or something important which you are working upon, so people are quite skeptical, like, what should we do, whether we should support or not. So how did you convince people to come with you or work together on the project and support you with for that?
Sure. So I think crowdfunding as a way of raising money has really become popular in India over the last 6 to 7 years, I would say.
That's
It's not just about asking for money, and I think uh, that's where you need to kind of draw the line between asking for something like pocket money and asking for money to do good.
That's true.
It's about connecting with people who may be viewing your campaign. How can you tell your story that moves someone else? So just an example I'll use, if the students in your college want to set up a composting a space for composting all your wet waste on campus, and your college may not have the money and you need to raise money for it from either the students in the college or outside. How do you ensure that the story that you tell makes people think that, oh my god, what they are doing is directly linked to my life as well? And as soon as you make that connection, it is much easier to convince someone to let go of even a little bit of money, right? And I think with so much content on the internet today, I think it's even more important to have, we talk about an elevator pitch when you're getting ready for this is something that third year, fourth year students will know. When you're getting ready for placements, how do you quickly tell your story without reading a 10-page CV and boring the other person, right?
That's
It's called an elevator pitch. So I think when you're crowdfunding, right, how can you have that elevator pitch ready at any time, whether it's social media, whether it's in person, whether it's on the phone, whatever it is? People don't, unfortunately, there's so much going on, people don't have the time, right? In 30 seconds, in 1 minute, how can you convince someone? So that time is definitely a big factor as well. In terms of like, it was definitely an interesting journey, like the crowdfunding in itself. There were some days where I thought that, it's not going to happen. Who's going to like give money for me to go somewhere and like do something? And then there were days where I felt guilty for taking money from people. And I was like, no, people should keep their own money. I shouldn't ask for it. But I think eventually, like the two things that I just mentioned to you, connecting with someone and having that elevator pitch really helped. I think I have had a lot of experience in crowdfunding. So I think one other story that I can share here is the museum that you mentioned right at the start, that my father started and that we now run together. It's actually a crowdfunded museum. It's India's first crowdfunded center for photography, and it's one of Southeast Asia's largest centers for photography. So we have
That's
over
wonderful.
4,000 cameras and other photographic equipment in our collection, and we crowdfunded money from over 200 people, friends, family, strangers, and people who couldn't give money actually came and gave help in terms of, how do we help you design the space, how do we help you market the space, how do we help you, do XYZ. So I think when my dad was crowdfunding that, the idea again was the same, right? It's a personal collection of cameras, no one really cares about that, but how can you convince people that a space, a museum, a space for art and culture and history is needed in a city like Gurgaon, right? A city that is known for malls and buildings and traffic. So that was that storytelling where you kind of convince people and you meet them where they are at, connect with the person. So everyone was like, yes, we need this space. So yeah, that's another crowdfunding story.
That's really wonderful to hear, especially the museum story about from your expedition one, because it's very difficult to convince people in a country like India, who a majority of whom are still living a very orthodox life, and they do not really, they will talk about bringing a change and working for the environment and doing stuff to make life better, but then when it comes to actually taking some action, they would already move a step back and they would, okay, we'll do it, but then eventually we will do it. That eventually to now makes a big difference. So moving ahead, sustainability is hugely impacted by consumption and generation of harmful materials, right? So like plastic, which consumption has increased in the past few months as we have seen the pandemic is going around, and a lot of materials which has been mandated, we can say, for the precautionary practices related to the virus spread. For example, we can take there are disposable masks and PPE kits, then there are hand sanitizer bottles made of single-use plastics. So in this manner, the usage of plastic in these past few months, and I would say a year nearly it has been now, these practices have really shot up. And then I've been reading reports of countries taking back their bans on plastic production in order to sustain the markets where people are demanding more and more new packaging materials on a daily basis to maintain hygienic conditions and make sure that there is no virus being spread. So what do you think it's going to create an impact on the environment, and how are we ever going to be able to go back to that position where we controlled it somewhat?
Yeah, thanks. I think to start off with, we never controlled it. It's always been a massive, massive problem and growing over the years. I'll start off by saying, actually, I think one thing we do need to understand is that plastic is not this evil product that it's made out to be, right? However, like for example, it's probably saved millions of lives through the last 15 months, because of its various properties. I think the problem is, and I think everyone here would agree, is how we use it, right? How we use it and how we deal with it after we're done using it. How we throw it away, this, use and throw culture that is becoming so pervasive again everywhere in the world. And even if you look at before the pandemic, there are multiple examples of unnecessary single-use plastic, whether it's
That's true.
packaging, whether it's products, whether it's you know um, things that you don't really need. And going forward, I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is definitely shifting that mindset about use and throw. I think going forward, specifically from the pandemic, it'll be about understanding where is it important and necessary and where it's just wasteful. But here I would like to also point out that we cannot pin the entire uh, crisis of waste or plastic consumption on individuals and on consumers. right? It must, like, companies and governments must bear responsibility through
That's true.
corporate practices, policies, etc. And I think they have a huge role to play, right? And again, as I'd mentioned earlier, consumer pressure plays a huge role in ensuring that these companies actually comply with, best practices. I think I would just say change is required at both ends. We've definitely like slid way back in terms of how we're using it, how we're going to proceed. It's becoming more important that we start thinking of solutions that can actually help us deal with waste that has already been created, because there's so much of it.
That's true. There have been talks going around the world, and there has been research being conducted on alternatives of plastic which can be eco-friendly. So, I was reading the other day, people are designing alternatives from plant fibers, and then there are alternatives from, we can say, sugar crystals or things like that, which are decomposable and are much less harmful than plastics. So, do you think that these alternatives would have success in the future if we take them or consider them on a national level or international level?
Yeah, I think alternatives definitely have a presence in the future, but one thing I would like to point out here is something called greenwashing. Greenwashing is essentially, deceptive marketing. It's engaging and exploiting consumers, and this comes in two forms essentially. One is where companies spend more time and effort and energy pushing products as being eco-friendly when they're really not. And then the second one would be companies pushing products that are made of alternative materials that actually take up or have a larger carbon footprint, right? And when we're talking about alternatives, obviously this conversation around alternatives over the last few years, I would even say over the last decade, has really ramped up, with people experimenting, like you said, with cornstarch, with seaweed, with potato skins, with all sorts of materials. But the problem is, sometimes I guess, when the name, people buy anything and everything, right? And that's where, if a product isn't fully researched, isn't fully, like, if the full information isn't given to a consumer, it's not really fair at the end of the day, right? When we think about
That's true.
what do you call it, compostable plastic, what does that mean?
Hmm.
If I put it in my backyard, after using it in my compost pit, 99% of chances are it will not decompose for years. What compostable plastic requires is heat at a very high level, and these
High
are
temperature.
industrial composting units that can handle. Where do we have industrial composting units? Like, nowhere. So if you
Nowhere.
don't close, as someone who's producing alternatives to plastic, if you don't close that loop, you're creating something with, okay, it's made of a better, it's not petroleum based, it's better, it's less harmful. But if you don't close that loop in terms of how is it actually going to go back into the earth, how is it actually going to be less harmful than regular plastic? Because if you look at a eco-friendly, as they call it, eco-friendly plastic, and you compare it to the regular plastic bag, now both have the ability to kill animals if they're out in the open, like if they're just like littered in waterways, or they, if a cow eats one, the impact will be the same. So how do you close that loop? And I think, uh, as consumers, for years we've been, unfortunately, victims of greenwashing. We are not able to distinguish what is actually good and what is just being done for, sales and profits. So, for example, I'll give you an example of greenwashing again. I was in Australia when one of the largest retailers, grocery chains, kind of announced this ban on single-use plastic bags. But it wasn't really a ban. They said that we will not give out free bags anymore, but you have to pay 15 cents and we'll give you a thicker plastic bag. Now that plastic bag was thicker, it was more harmful to the environment. It, used more petroleum-based products to be made. But the entire campaign was, let's move away from single-use plastic. And just as an individual, I could, in the weeks after this campaign was rolled out and these bags actually hit the market, I could see roads and beaches littered with these bags everywhere. No one was using them again. Because when you're spending $20, $30 on groceries, buying one bag for 15 cents is not going to pinch you.
Exactly.
You will just buy it and be like, acha, next time I'll bring my own bag. But next time again, you will forget. You will spend 15 cents again. And where is that money going? The company was kind of just pocketing it.
That's
Right?
true.
I think when it comes to like alternatives to plastics, or trying to reduce plastics, it's always, I guess it's always important to, like I said again, close that loop. And unfortunately, it is days like today, which is World Environment Day, where companies try to market it to no extent, right? They will try to get that entry level, lazy, green consumer who's ready to buy anything with a, some sort of symbol or sign on it that says, look, I'm sustainable, look, I'm green. So yeah, alternatives do, again, coming back to your main question, alternatives do have a future, but again, there is a role that companies need to play while marketing that product and while closing the loop, and that customers or consumers need to play, understanding what is actually true and what's not.
That's true. Consumer awareness plays a big role when it comes to products like these in the market. Like you just mentioned, there would be marketplaces would say that, we are charging you for the bag just to make sure that you reuse it and you cherish it for your lifetime and then keep using it and dispose it off in a proper manner. But then they would not inform the consumer that actual thought when they are selling it to them. They would just hand over the bag, they would take the money, but then you would never see a person at the counter standing there and saying you that, sir or ma'am, please you reuse this properly and do not throw it away. They would just market the campaign as being green, but it's really important that the consumer takes up the awareness. So all right. So, Malika, we have read that you worked for the Ganga Cleanup Project and currently you are working with Purpose. So, if you could share your experience with us. How was it when you were working on the Ganga Cleanup Project, and how is it now at Purpose? Your work experience.
Yeah, I think so. Starting with my job in Varanasi, I was working with an organization called Renew Oceans. And there, essentially, we were trying to divert ocean-bound plastic waste. So now, where does the plastic waste in our oceans really come from, right? It comes from rivers. And there are about 10 rivers that lead to about 90% of ocean plastic, right? And Ganga actually sends about some, forget the number now, but it is the second most polluting river in the world after Yangtze in China. And what we were trying to do was trying to stop that plastic waste from actually going into the river and then going into the ocean, right? And how we were doing that was through a range of, it was a three-pronged strategy. One was, of course, community engagement and education. How do you get people, in living in those low-lying riverside communities to understand that, when they throw something into the river, it's actually going down further. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So one important part was community engagement and education. So we were constantly engaging with the schools as well in those communities. The second one was actually using, very low cost fencing, nets, etc., to stop the plastic at different stages. So we were developing these with the community. And the third one was actually a process through which we were converting plastic, single-use plastic mainly, into fuel. Now, this was zero-emission fuel that was being used to actually run 2 autos in the city. And this technology, it came from the US. They've been working on this. It has been done in India as well, but the organization that I was with brought the technology from the US. They've been working on it for about like 10 years, refining it, etc. There were a lot of hurdles in terms of getting government buy-in, getting local leaders to support what we were doing, to give us space. We obviously needed a shed where we could put the machinery. So much time, at least the first 1 year, just went in getting permissions. It was very, very, very difficult. I was only there for about 7 or 8 months until I fell very badly sick and I had to come back to Delhi. And then when purpose is very different from what I was doing in Varanasi. Purpose is, we believe in building movements, long-term movements for a just and habitable world. So whether that's working on environmental causes or social causes. Now, what is a movement, right? A movement is, how we work on movements is by building smaller campaigns. Many small campaigns lead to one large movement. Right. And then what we are essentially doing is working across the country with some of the largest philanthropies and largest foundations, working on different sorts of change. Right. And a very, very important part of what we do in this form of campaigning is understanding two things. Understanding where does the power lie? If I want to bring about XYZ change, who can make it happen? So doing this sort of power mapping, right? So again, I'll take an example of your college. If you want to bring about change in, how your waste is managed, you will kind of map out who looks after it right now, who are they kind of communicating with, who do they get, orders from, or whatever, however you want to word it. And then on the outside, where do the students really sit? So when you map it out, and we do this at a city level, at a state level, to understand who has the ability to create that change, and then we work backwards, right? We start thinking, okay, if X has the ability to change or bring about power, what do we need to do to convince them? And then the second most important thing that we do while creating these campaigns and larger movements is bringing in new voices. So for example, in the climate movement, if you've seen, it's for the longest time, it was the same people saying things again and again and again, right? It was, how do we get people who don't care about the environment, right? How do we get them to care? How do we broaden that movement so it includes everyone and anyone? So yeah, that's my work at Purpose. There are multiple different campaigns I'm working on right now. So yeah.
It's really good to, just sit here and hear you speaking about that, because, you're really passionate about your work, and that's somewhere it makes you the best working at that. So moving ahead, I have this one last question to sum it up. You have been working for quite a long time now as a zero waste advocate. So you've adopted a lifestyle which is all the more conscious and all the more concerned by while keeping the environment safe. So do you recommend any such changes or any such steps which all of us can easily adopt to bring those essential changes in our lifestyle as responsible consumers, as responsible citizens, to protect the earth or protect our environment?
Great. So like I had said earlier, I think there is so much content out there. There are so many of these, influencers and content creators who are telling you that, do this, buy this, don't buy this. So today I'm actually not going to give you guys steps, because that's available everywhere, right? What I'm going to tell you is what really changed it all for me. And that was understanding what does sustainability mean to you and how does it manifest itself, right? I think sustainability is not only about reducing waste. It's not only about taking public transport. It's about a wide range of interlinking issues, right? So when you say that I'm sustainable, I don't buy chips or things wrapped in plastic. Like, sorry to burst your bubble, that doesn't mean you're sustainable, right? And that's what the big change for me was. If you read my blog, you said if you read the first few posts that I had written, they were only about waste, because that's how I was looking at sustainability and like environmental issues. But as mentioned earlier, environmental, actually, I'm not sure if I mentioned this through right now, but environmental issues are also human rights issues, right? So understanding that some of the poorest communities have to live among the waste that we create, understanding that there are children who start scavenging for recyclables before they can even crawl and walk, understanding that there are larger issues at hand. So what does sustainability mean to you and what does it look like? Understanding, seeing it from multiple lenses. I think one important thing that helped me is talking to people who have different opinions, who have different perspectives, watching a lot of documentaries, hearing a lot of podcasts, reading a lot of books. I think once you gain those different perspectives, then you can say, okay, these are the things I want to do in my life because this is what I can control. So, for example, when I think about reducing waste, it's not just for the environment, right? It's because I see that the man who comes to collect the entire colony's waste every morning, he is no one thinks about him, right? He has to use his hands, take everyone's rubbish, put it in his in his cart. Why aren't we thinking about him? Why aren't we talking about him as well? Right? So our waste directly has impacts on his health.
That's true.
So so I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to give you all tips and tricks. It is everyone is on a different path and everyone is on a different journey. It is for you to decide what makes sense to you, what works for you, right? So yeah, that's where I guess I'll stop.
All right. So, well, this has been one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a long time with a speaker so young and so experienced. I would say, indeed, quite awe-inspiring. So, thank you, Mallika, for sharing your dynamic experiences with us and providing us all a very new perspective towards environmental consciousness. So we will now declare the floor open for questions and we'll see if any one of you has any questions, please drop them in the chat box. We will wait for 5 minutes and then we'll move forward.
Hi, Malika. It was pleasure listening to you. I have a question. When I read 2 years back your blog on zero waste, you were called the first zero waste traveler in India. So, what do you suggest? What do you think that in a country like India, how difficult is to follow a zero waste, or let's talk about at least less waste lifestyle to live in a country like India?
I think if we all think about how our grandparents and parents grew up, right, that is pretty much zero waste. It's not a Western concept at all. Zero waste, the concept in itself, it may be, it may sound Western, it may sound modern, it may sound new, but it's actually a concept that is so ingrained in how Indians have, grown up, and how our society is actually how our culture has been, right? If you look at if you look at how, what farming practices have been followed for years and years, or how a lot of rural India still lives, that's zero waste. Unfortunately, due to convenience and ease, there are more and more things that are packaged in plastic. There are more and more things that are reaching the most rural places of our country as well, right? So I think there are so many practices that if we follow, we're naturally going the zero waste route. We don't even have to call it out. But unfortunately, like I said, because of convenience, a lot of the younger generations at least are getting very used to this new kind of lifestyle where everything is packaged. You kind of have one dustbin, throw everything in there, out of sight, out of mind. Fast-paced lifestyles are becoming more and more common. So you don't have time to even for something as simple as, if we have 3 dustbins in our house, there have been people who've actually told me, I'm sorry, I don't have the time to keep 3 dustbins and choose each time which dustbin to put what in. So it's not difficult to answer your question. It's just we have to pause, think about the consequences of our actions, and take inspiration from your parents, grandparents, or even great grandparents. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for the answer, Mallika. We have one more question from Daksh, I believe. So, why is the government doesn't do plastic recycling campaigns at large if we have alternatives like plastic brick, I believe he's willing to say, etc. So, why does the government take up larger campaigns to recycle them?
Yeah, so I think the plastic brick is a startup, and there are many of them, but these initiatives that are creating plastic bricks are private startups mostly. They're not, they have not scaled enough as yet. So it's when things, of course, it's a chicken and egg situation. When things start scaling, the government kind of realizes, but we also need government support to get things to scale. I think in its own way, the government has done campaigns. For example, like, I'm not a big fan of this campaign, but the Swachh Bharat campaign, for example, it felt more like you're kind of brushing things under the carpet, jhadu lagao, and that's all. But there is a lot more to that, right? Asking yourself, I think campaigns should be more than one tactic. You have to actually get people to think and talk and engage. So I think also another way of answering this question is, why wait for the government? Why not kind of go ahead and start something ourselves?
That's
Large
true.
numbers, of course.
That's true. The Swachh Bharat became a hit because of people supporting it in large numbers and not really the government bringing
Yeah,
out
I
the
think Swachh Bharat was a good starting point in terms of, cleanliness is important, getting people to recognize that waste is there. So in that sense, I think the campaign did play a role. It kind of spotlighted on waste. But I think, again, like Swachh Bharat, you need to talk about sanitation workers, which to some degree it did. But you also need to talk about when you sweep something away, where is it going? So more
That's
upstream solutions than downstream solutions are needed. Even
true.
for example, the plastic brick campaign, or the plastic brick initiative, there are two ways of looking at plastic waste campaigns. One is upstream, where you think of design and innovation to reduce or remove plastic from ever being generated, or like plastic waste from being generated. The other is a downstream solution, which is the plastic brick, or even what I was doing in Varanasi, which is conversion of plastics to no emission fuel. Those are downstream. Plastic waste has already been generated. Now what do you do with it? So a mix of both are required to actually create any sort of impact.
Hello, Mallika. This is Denny. It has been wonderful listening to you, and it's not a question actually, it's a concern also. Am I audible? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yeah. So one thing is, just as you said, that everybody has a different perspective when they see environment. This is something which has been, has been a concern for me, like using of motor vehicles or anything for that sense. So since we have already moved on so much towards urbanization, and a thing that has come to my mind long before, like, why can't we go back to our basics? It's like, whatever you require, you cultivate, and and then whatever the waste is, like, it is easier for disposal of those things, because when you create less, and when you use it less, so the outcome of the waste would be less, so it would be easier. So my question is, I just want to know your take. Is it possible that we go back to our basics, just as it has been it has actually inspired me when you said your father has been working as a farmer, creating your. So is it possible that we go back to basic, or should we go back to the basic? Should we listen to our urbanization, the requirements and needs? You know, that is my concern. So what is your take on this?
That's a very interesting thought. I think there are a couple of ways of looking at it. There have definitely been, communities across the world who've gone back to this sort of, community living where you create and you use whatever you want, but that's not been done at a large scale. And in my opinion, I mean, when you say go back to how we were, that also means reversing some of the amazing inventions that have come along the way, right? Like when you look at medicine today, like, do you think, if we go back, that means losing that as well? I don't think it's possible to go back, and I wouldn't really advocate for it. What I would advocate for is, how do we, treat the planet and people fairly in what we are today, in the situation that we are today. So you spoke about like motor vehicles as well, right? I think for the longest time, cars have been given so much importance. But now non-motorized transport is actually picking up. Like a lot of cities are promoting non-motorized transport. There are proper cycle lanes, and footpaths are being restored and kind of structured in a way that it's accessible and safe for everyone. So I wouldn't say like going back is the solution. I would really say, how can we leverage all the amazing inventions that have been created so far to actually create a better place for everyone?
Yeah, somewhere down the line, Malvika, I feel that we have all these years, probably not every invention, but some of the inventions we have actually created a web for all of us, and we're struggling now to come out of that web and take a see for a straight route towards
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
But then it's quite difficult to answer this. I understand this. Going back to
And
basics.
I won't sugarcoat it. I completely agree with you. I think the situation in which we are today is a very sticky situation. We are, like you said, in a web, and we are struggling to come out of it. Just yesterday, at least, I'm not sure if this happened in Jaipur, but at least in Delhi, there was a massive storm.
Yeah.
And it rained and it rained and it rained, and it's not common for it
Monsoon, yes.
to
Yeah.
be for there to be such extreme weather events like this in the middle of
In month of
summer.
June. Yeah, actually.
We had the coldest May in 13 years, right?
That's true.
We had, and yesterday was the first time when I actually and this tree that I had planted when I was 5, actually half of it fell over yesterday because of the rain, and it's good 23 years old. And for the first time, I felt that we're actually going to be seeing a lot more of these extreme weather events, and it is going to get scary. It's great that we're planting trees, and we need to keep doing that. But sometimes I won't lie, even I feel quite pessimistic about the future. But have to remain, on most days, have to remain, um, with a positive mind.
Even for the medicines that you were commenting, no, just now, just as you said. Of course, I do agree, and you cannot be none of, it has become a part and parcel of our life. I
Yeah.
just, when I go back and I see how my parents have lived, they have been so natural with everything. Medicines were the last resort, and now this has taken up, like, a big business kind of a thing. And even in Corona times, we see people have been selling some life-saving drugs in so much cost, which is beyond an access to a common man. So
Yeah.
let us see if we can find it. Thank you so much, Malvika.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much, Mallika, for answering that question. And just to add a bit, going back in time would even become more difficult if we consider all the social conditions we are living in today, socio-economic conditions which are there. People have really been evolving and evolving in such a manner that the societal thinking or imagery of theirs has become more important than the environment in their thinking, if we say. So we require a massive change in the outlook of people towards life, in bringing up that conscious image, if we say. So if they shift that thinking from a societal image to a more concerned image for the environment. So thank you, Rani ma'am, for that question, and thank you, Malika, for answering all those curious questions. So as we come to an end of this very insightful session, I would like to express our very heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Mallika Arya, who took out time from her very busy schedule on this precious occasion of World Environment Day and shared her inspiring experiences and lifestyle with us. We have a long way to go and a lot to learn from citizens like Malika, who are following their passion to create a positive difference and protect the planet by leading a conscious life and convincing more and more people to adopt it. It is worth all the praise that at such a young age, Malika manages to impact thousands of lives through her work. Thank you once again, Malika, for joining us today. I would also like to thank Reverend Father Dr. A. Rex Angelo, SJ, our principal and the convener for this session, for allowing us to host this informative and insightful event. I also thank Ms. Purvi Meeratwal and Ms. Sonali Thakur, the coordinators for the session, for all their valuable efforts. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all Arya participants for joining us today and making this event a grand success. We have put a link for the feedback form in the chat box. So before leaving, please do share your valuable feedback with us. And as we have discussed in the session, as responsible human beings, as responsible citizens, we really need to study the practices we adopt to lead a healthy lifestyle and definitely to protect our planet, because if there is no future for the planet, there's definitely no future for our species as well. So being the most conscious beings on this earth, as we say, we think of us as the most intelligent beings, so we definitely need to take measures to undo the harms which we've been doing to the environment and really start living a sustainable and conscious life. So with this, I hope you all are safe, and please keep safe. Things are not pretty clear out there. So please be safe. And once again, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you in many more events in the future as well. Thank you, Mallika. Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
joining
you
us.
so much for having me today.
It was a great pleasure to have you, and it was a great honor indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mallika. Thank you, Kanvika.
Thank you, ma'am.